Hey, I'm ZSH and today we're going to be building a predator-prey exhibit that makes it look like lions are living in the same habitat as the giraffe, zebra, wildebeest and warthogs that live on our savannah. Let's go! A predator-prey habitat relies on what is essentially an optical illusion. We need to get our guests standing at the exact right height that the lion habitat we're about to build appears to be the same habitat as the savannah that we already have. We're going to achieve that by raising the terrain in this habitat and then constructing a ditch that leads into the savannah. And if we get our angles exactly right, you won't be able to see the ditch at all, and there'll appear to be no separation between the lions and the savannah. To keep our animals and our guests safe, this ditch needs to be 25 feet wide by 15 feet tall. That's 7.6 by 4.5 meters, which is what we're just measuring out here. And then we're going to start digging out the terrain and getting the ditch that will separate the habitats built. This habitat is not just some crazy Planet Zoo idea. It's inspired by a habitat in a zoo in the US called Caldwell Zoo. I've not been there, I've just seen photos of it, but this exhibit is pretty famous. It's certainly one of the best examples of this kind of thing that I've seen. It is going to be very cool to see this when it's done. And we're going to have a bit of lore as well, because the entrance is going to be through the zoo's old lion house. I figure with Bellemont Zoo being around since 1850, they would of course have had lions from the get-go. You can't have a zoo without lions. And I'm imagining that in the early 20th century, they built a lion house that was the most popular part of the zoo. So rather than knocking it all down, they've kept the facade of the building and used it as the entrance to this area. So later on, we're going to build a classic lion house entrance and use it to get our guests into this very modern lion habitat. This part of the habitat is going to be a moat, because I want the view into the lions and the savannah from here to be completely unrestricted. So there's going to be no fences or glass, just completely open with a moat separating the guests from the lions. The moat is inspired by London Zoo's previous lion habitat, which is one of my favourites when I was a kid. And we're also going to take a bit of inspiration from their current lion habitat as well, because that's one of the best I've seen. We're using the Jeep tracks here to get some smooth paths in to get the guests from the entrance to the habitat up to the viewing areas, and then another one here to get them from the savannah, so you can get into this from both ends. It will either be the entrance to Africa or the climax of the African section, depending on which way you're walking around the zoo. And once we've got those in, we can delete all the tracks and we've got the terrain that we can build our paths on. Here we go, this is the basic layout of the habitat. It's about 1,700 square meters, which is pretty much the minimum you'd want for a breeding group of lions, and then room for cubs as well. Now we can get onto the paths. This is where the entrance is going to be, and these paths were not fun to do. We're going to start by gridding across here, and then what we need is some steps to start taking people up through the building, because the building itself is going to have steps on it. We'll do the basic layout of the paths first, getting it up those smooth slopes we created, and across to the two different viewing areas, and then down the other side to join it back up with the path past the savannah and the pygmy hippos. And there we go, that's the basic shape of the habitat with all the paths in. We'll get onto the steps later, because first I want to start building the actual habitat and getting it looking good. This is the final habitat in our African area, so we've already got a huge amount of African rock work and some beautiful mud walls as well in our Indian rhino habitat, and we're going to use those to build most of the rest of this habitat, starting with the all-important ditch. In order for this to work, what we need is a steep sheer slope on the savannah side of things, which is where the mud walls come in so that the lions can't get out, and then a much more gentle slope on the other side so that there's no danger of them falling in and hurting themselves. We'll curve this mud wall around here, making sure it's at the exact height that the guests can't see it, and then we're going to use the ramp tool and start putting in a much gentler slope on the other side. This does give a potential issue, which is that the lions can't be seen if they go down this slope, but normally what you do is just make the bottom of the slope a very unattractive place for them to be. Little rocks, spiky bushes, things like that, so it's not a lot of fun down there, and then make sure there's loads of enrichment and things to do in the rest of the habitat, and that'll ensure the lions spend as little time down there as possible. And with the ramp in, we can start getting the moat to look good. So we use the African rocks that we've used throughout this area to tidy up the edges of the terrain. We're going to fill it completely with rocks, except for the little slope that we put in. That is going to enable the lions to get out of the water if they end up in there. Lions can swim, but like domestic cats, they really don't like it. You will occasionally see them in the water if maybe a tasty little pigeon or a duck or something lands in there. I've seen videos of lions jumping into the water in their habitats to get them. We'll put another sheer wall in using the mud walls to make sure that they can't climb out of the water on the guest side of things. And then we'll move on to some more rock work. I've stolen some of the mountain in the savannah, and we're going to use that arrangement of rocks to build some smaller cliffs surrounding this habitat. So that ties it in nicely with the savannah. That means we've got two completely different types of of rock work in here, which makes it look more varied. And if you put one more piece in here, move the camera down, you can see it gives us kind of a window into the savannah. It looks really good. Then we can move on to one more bit of rock work, which is to give the lions some rocks to actually stand on. These will be rocks they can climb on. All the rest of the rock work you can see will have completely sheer concrete at the bottom of it so that they can't get up on there. But this will be somewhere they can climb up to. And it also happens to give the guests the perfect view of them looking out over the savannah. Now we're going to make the habitat more interesting with a lot of terrain variations. At this stage, I'm not actually getting the terrain to the correct height for the optical illusion into the next habitat, just concentrating on getting it looking good. We'll get the exact height in later. We need to make sure that the guest paths, the viewing and everything is perfect before we make the final changes. Here's where we are now, starting to look like a habitat at last. Now it's time to get the barriers in. We're going to be using 3 different types of barrier for this habitat. Firstly, glass, which is going to provide the guests with really close-up viewing of the lions. This is the part that's based on London Zoo's current lion habitat. We'll get these into the right position. Then we'll move on to the next barrier type, which is the wood logs. All of these will be covered up with rocks and concrete, but it will prevent the guests from trying to look through parts of the habitat that they shouldn't. And then along here, we'll be using null barriers because we don't need any sort of barrier. We've already got the mud walls in there. And we'll just keep doing that all the way around, alternating between the wood logs and the null barriers, depending on whether the guests are going to be standing there or not. And then we'll just raise the height of the glass to get a big impressive viewing window in there. About 3 meters should do it, I think. And then we can move on to the planting. I've got another barrier in here now, so we've got a higher one to keep the guests out and a lower one to keep the lions in. And in between them, we're going to use creosote bushes. We'll use the normal creosote bushes, a few dead creosote bushes, and then one of the ones with flowers on it as well, just to get a really vibrant look in there. And with the 2 guest viewing spots done, we can finally get the terrain to the correct height to achieve what we want. We're in Explore Cam here to get to the exact height of the guests, and that height of terrain completely blocks out the join between the 2 habitats. If we check it out, you can see that it is starting to work. All we need to do now is fill this with grass to match the savannah, and then hop back into the Explore Cam, and there we go. You literally cannot see the join between the 2 habitats. Very happy with how this is looking already. I'm going to do the rest of the foliage and just put a little house in for the lions as well, off camera, so we can move on to building the entrance to the area. But before we do that, we've got something very cute to see in the lynx habitat. I've never seen the lynx kittens in this game before, and they do not disappoint. They are ridiculously adorable. Any excuse to get back into the forest. It's one of my favourite habitats that we've ever built on the channel, I think. We should have some red deer babies coming along soon as well, so we will check those out in a future episode when they arrive. Let's get on to building the lion house. We're going to start with the steps that I mentioned at the start of the episode, the bit that was not fun. So we're going to be building custom steps, and in order for the guests to look correct as they walk up them, that means we need the path steps underneath them. So after lots of struggling, what I've done is used the elevated length option and taken that down to the minimum, which enables us to put very small steps in. And then with a combination of gridding the path and lots of full starts, we've managed to get 2 small steps in here, which will direct the guests through 2 of the archways that we're going to build, which are the main feature of this entrance. The building itself is inspired by a photo I came across on ZooChat, which I've been wanting to use ever since. It was the entrance to a bird park on Catalina Island, just off the coast of California. I think it dates from the beginning of the 20th century, and it shut down, I don't know when, many years ago. I don't really know anything about the place other than what the entrance looked like and the fact that it was a bird park, but it had a really cool kind of Spanish colonial revivalist style entrance, much like the one we used in San Bernardino Zoo actually. I thought it'd be fun to do another one of those. The main feature of it was these really tall, thin archways. They were really elegant. That's what caught my eye. But as you can see here, all the entrances in the game are much thicker and less elegant. So I went through all the pieces to find the one that most closely matched one I was looking at. And this piece from the Twilight pack, it's a window arch, had the much taller, thinner look that I was going for. So we're going to use this as a template and then use this block from the Twilight pack to create our own archways. So all we need to do is take this block and line it up with the inside of the arch piece, and then place another one down and rotate that so that it fits into the inside in the next part of the curve, paying close attention to the angles until we get to the top of the archway. This piece has got a really good texture on it, and because it's textured and it's not quite flat, you don't get any Z fighting as you move it about, which is really useful. Once we get to the top of the archway here, then we can just select what we've done and clone it round to the other side, and we will have an almost complete archway, just one more piece to place in the middle, and again rotate that so it's the correct angle for the top of the arch. And then we can extend the bottom of the arch down to the ground with some more of the same piece. And then finally, we'll use that same piece again to fill in the rest of it until we've got one solid archway. It looks really good with this texture. We'll just use one of the European pieces to add some detail into the archway just below where the actual arch is. You can already see here the view the guests will have as they walk under these arches, the juxtaposition of the old Spanish colonial architecture and then the ultra-modern lion habitat and all the rock work behind it is going to be really cool. Now we can just select half of it and copy it across to get the front of the building. We're going to have 5 archways. The first 2 will function as the entrance and exit for the guests, and the last 3 will be covered up like they used to have a purpose, but they don't anymore. We'll put some really nice tiles on there as well. We'll stick some of the new lamps on from the Americas pack, and then we'll copy the whole thing behind itself to form the back of the entrance, and then just fill the rest of it in with plaster pieces and a pretty basic shingle roof. Once that's done, we can do something that is one of my favourite things to do in Planet Zoo, which is to use a new piece for the first time. It is the window guards from the America's Animal Pack. We're going to create some old gates between these archways to direct people through the parts of the entrance that we actually want them to use. We'll drop in a few of the European iron beams, and then another piece I don't think we've used before, the Fiesta Ranch Gate fixture, to attach it to the walls. We'll get a couple of those in, and that's all we need. Looking good. We're going to drop some vending machines down here as well. Just thought that'd be a nice little touch and give the rest of the building some purpose. Very rarely use the vending machines in the game, but I actually quite like them down here. And then we're going to come back to the front of the building and start detailing. We love this lion statue on the channel. Any excuse to use it, and we will. And what could be a better excuse than a lion house? So we're going to have 2 of those facing each other. They fit perfectly into this alcove, and then I'm just going to raise them so it looks like they're standing on the new bricks that we've just placed down. We'll cover up the middle of it with the enormous lion head statue, but we're just going to use the back of it just to give us a nice shape to cover up the join between the 2 statues there. Adds a real touch of class to the building, I think. And that being said, let's have a look at what it looks like now. I've done a bit of landscaping around it so you can start to see what the final result's going to look like, but it's missing a sign. There was some really striking lettering on the Catalina Bird Park. We can't quite replicate that exactly here, but we can get pretty close using this curved sign. We'll just sink that into the wall, get the colours right, and then we'll make another one and use the spaces before and after the words to shrink that down to the right size. We'll drop a couple of bins in behind the archways just so when our guests come in here they don't walk through the arch, they stick to the parts they should be walking into. And then while I was going through the African pieces in the game, I came across this kind of zebra pattern planter and I thought it would make a really good enrichment item for the lions. So we're going to suspend this from the acacia tree here just with a few rope pieces. This is something you'll see in big cat habitats a lot. Every day the keepers will go in and put food in a container and it will be hidden or placed somewhere in the habitat different to where it was the day before. Try and get it in a different place every day so the cats always have to hunt for their food. Makes their lives much more interesting. And we've got ourselves a little hanging feeder there. Pretty pleased with that. Back to the entrance, I realised this North African fountain would work really nicely with our lion statue. If we recolour it so it matches the walls and then get it into the right position, gives us a little water feature. And then we're on to the final stage of the build. You can see I've added in some signage and an abandoned safari jeep because you must have that in every African area you build. What we're going to do now is build a wall just to tie the whole area together and guide people into the lions. This is based on some South African colonial architecture I found. I mean, it's super simple, it's just 2 pieces, but we'll add some decorative ends to the wall as well. These 2 grid pieces, it's called the mud wall top. It's basically the same as the 1 meter mud wall, but the top of it, rather than just cutting off and being completely rectangular like most of the wall pieces are, the top is actually textured properly with a slight curve to it. It's an amazing piece, which I kind of forgotten about, to be honest, but I'll be using it a lot more in future because it does really well as a mud wall or a plaster wall. We'll use the plaster cone piece to create the ends. This is the smallest one. Just move that into position, we'll recolor it so it matches the rest of the walls, and then we're going to make some clones underneath it so that it perfectly joins on with the lower parts of the wall. Make sure it's in the center. We'll copy this across to the ends of all the walls, and that is our lion house and our predator prey exhibit completed. Let's check it out. I've got to be honest, I wasn't 100% sure whether to add the colonial style building at the front, but looking at the finished result, I'm really glad we did. I think it really sets the scene, it gives a sense of history to this part of the zoo, and as the guests go from the entrance to the lions, I think it works really well. Here they are exploring their new habitat. Let's take a look at it from the savannah and the guest viewing. Here she comes, love that view. And we'll go back now and see what it's going to look like from where the guests are standing. There we go. You can even see it from the giraffe viewing. That is the predator-prey habitat. It was not easy to build, but I'm really happy with how that turned out. I said earlier that you can't have a zoo without lions, and I'm really happy that we finally have them in Bellemont Zoo. Let's take a look at where we started today, and just behind the Madagascar house, this is where we are now. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Next week we have another big animal to bring into the zoo. Looking forward to that. Thank you especially to those of you who've joined the Explorers Club. Hit the join button on the channel if you want to see your name up here, and I'll see you again soon for some more Planet Zoo.